Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat learning session with TBA Rabbinic Intern Ben Sigal.
I want to take a look at one of the verses in this week's Parsha, and then a couple of different takes in the Talmud that are all based off of one verse. Or one verse, really, kind of two verses. So for the sake of those on Zoom, I'm going to read all the text, but for those, I would love some audience participation when we actually get to the point of asking questions. So Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, these are my fixed times, the fixed times of Adonai, which you shall proclaim as sacred occasions." Seems fairly straightforward. Anyone have any hot takes on this, just looking at the text without reading ahead? What do you make of this? Yes. So that's kind of where we're going. Marshall shared, it's not God who fixes these times, it's the people. Where do you get that from? Asher tikra'u otam, that you shall proclaim them. So the rabbis are going to do something a little bit different, but that's generally what they're going to look at. So there's two stories that I want to dive into that are going to look at those texts. One of them I actually taught here, sometime around high holidays this past year. I just remember being in that mindset and teaching this, in part because it's related to that. And then the second one is something that I only found for the first time in this sort of a setting as I was preparing this, which is kind of the coda to everything else. So this is a famous story from the Talmud. There was another incident, doesn't matter what the first incident was, in which two witnesses came and said, "We saw the new moon at its anticipated time on the night of the 30th day of the previous month. However, on the following night, the start of the 31st, which is often the determinant of a full month, a 30-day month, it was not seen. And nevertheless, Rabban Gamliel accepted the new moon on the 30th day." So what's going on here, just for some background, is today we live on a very set calendar schedule. It used to be back in the day that there would actually need to be witnesses as to where the moon was in its cycle, and the month would be set based off of witnesses of seeing the new moon, which is actually seeing no moon whatsoever. And they would come to the head of the court, which in this case is Rabban Gamliel, and say, "We saw the new moon, you should start the new month." And because there's a uncertainty as to whether or not it's going to be a 29-day month or a 30-day month, Rabban Gamliel accepts their testimony, despite the fact that it didn't pan out the way that astrologically it should have. Continuing on, Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinas disagreed and said, "They are false witnesses. How can witnesses testify that a woman gave birth and on the next day her belly is between her teeth?" Which is his very interesting way of saying she's still obviously pregnant. If the new moon was already visible at its anticipated time, it couldn't be seen a day later. Rabbi Yehoshua said to him, "I see the logic of your statement. The new moon must be established a day later." Upon hearing that Rabbi Yehoshua had challenged his ruling, Rabban Gamliel sent a message to him, "I decree against you that you must appear before me with your staff and your money on the day on which Yom Kippur occurs according to your calculation. According to my calculation, that day would be the 11th of Tishrei, the day after Yom Kippur." So what he's saying, why would this be important that Rabbi Yehoshua would show up with his staff and his money on the day that he thinks is Yom Kippur, but Rabban Gamliel doesn't? What is Rabban Gamliel essentially asking Rabbi Yehoshua to do? Yes, exactly. To show up on Yom Kippur with things that you're not supposed to have on Yom Kippur. You're not supposed to be carrying around. You're not supposed to be using, right? He's showing up with his wallet and he's carrying stuff outside of an Eruv. This is He's basically asking him to desecrate Yom Kippur on the day that that Rabbi Yehoshua thinks is Yom Kippur. And Rabban Gamliel has no problem with this because he doesn't think it's Yom Kippur. That's what we have going on here. Yes, there's a inherent power struggle going on here, but don't worry, it's going to be solved. Rabbi Akiva went and found Rabbi Yehoshua distressed that the head of the great Sanhedrin was forcing him to desecrate the day that he maintained was Yom Kippur. In an attempt to console him, Rabbi Akiva said to Rabbi Yehoshua, I can learn from a verse that everything that Rabban Gamliel did in sanctifying the month is done. It is valid, as it is stated, these are the appointed seasons of the Lord, sacred convocations which you shall proclaim in their seasons. This is 2 verses after the verses that we looked at. This language is important that it comes up again and again, and we'll see that in a minute. This verse indicates that whether you have proclaimed them at their proper time or whether you have declared them not at their proper time, I have only these festivals as established by the representatives of the Jewish people. That's the end of one rabbinic interaction between Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Akiva. But he's not done. Rabbi Yehoshua then came to Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinos, who said to him, if we come to debate and question the rulings of the court of Rabban Gamliel, we must debate and question the rulings of every court that has stood from the days of Moses until now. As it is stated, then Moses went up, and Aaron, Nadav, and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel. But why were the names of these 70 elders not specified? Rather, this comes to teach that every set of 3 judges that stands as a court over the Jewish people has the same status as the court of Moses. Since it is not revealed who sat on that court, apparently it is enough that they were official judges in the Jewish court. And when Rabbi Yehoshua heard that Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinos maintained that they must submit to Rabban Gamliel's decision, he took his staff and his money in his hand and went to Yavne to Rabban Gamliel on the day on which Yom Kippur occurred according to his own calculations. Upon seeing him, Rabban Gamliel stood up and kissed him on the head. He said to him, come in peace, my teacher and my student. You are my teacher in wisdom, and you are my student as you accepted my statement. So this is story 1. I'm curious initial reactions to this story. What people make of the power struggle, what people make of Rabbi Yehoshua as he's trying to process this. Yeah, I sense you want to say more. They're all in Israel. Yeah. They're not necessarily in the same town, but they're in the same general geographic area. Think like they're all within the greater Los Angeles area for like that sort of a reference area. Okay, fair enough. What do you make of this idea of the days needing to be set by human beings and not by God? What? We don't have a telephone line to God, so it has to be set by human beings. Yeah, so Steve is referencing another part of the Talmud where there's a story where it appears as though God is actually intervening on behalf of one human being who is in the minority. I believe it's Rabbi Eliezer. He's in the minority, and everyone else is saying, no, this is what we need to do. God is intervening on one person's behalf, and because the majority is voted in a different direction, that's the direction that the Jewish people go in. And what's interesting, though, and I'm going to potentially bring this up later this week, the coda to that story is Rabbi Eliezer then going and killing people with his frustration over it. So even in these moments where it seems like we as humans have the ability to set the calendar, there's still supposed to be some sort of discretion that is done with it, whether it's a decision of setting the calendar, whether it's making a halakhic decision. Great. For the sake of time, I'm going to move on to the second story, which is the coda to the story that I think is interesting. The Mishnah taught that Rabbi Akiva went and found him distressed that the head of the great Sanhedrin was forcing him to desecrate the day that he maintained was Yom Kippur. This is, I guess, not a coda, but somewhere in the middle of this story. A dilemma was raised before the sages. Who was distressed? Was Rabbi Akiva distressed, or was Rabbi Yehoshua distressed? So we have read this initial story as it was Rabbi Yehoshua who was distressed, and he came to Rabbi Akiva. But the rabbis are now bringing up this possibility that it could actually have been Rabbi Akiva who was distressed. The Gemara answers, come in here as it was taught in a Baraita. Rabbi Akiva went and found Rabbi Yehoshua in a state of distress. And he said to him, my teacher, for what reason are you distressed? Rabbi Yehoshua said to him, Rabbi Akiva, it is fitting for one to fall sick in bed for 12 months, rather to have this decree issued against him. Rabbi Akiva said to him, my teacher, allow me to say to you before you one matter that you yourself once taught me. He said to him, speak. This is Rabbi Yehoshua saying to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva then says to Rabbi Yehoshua, it states with respect to the festivals, the appointed seasons of the Lord, which you shall proclaim them, O Tam, to be sacred occasions. And it is written, these are the appointed seasons of the Lord, sacred convocations, you shall proclaim them, O Tam, in their seasons. And it is written, these are the appointed seasons of the Lord, you shall proclaim them, O Tam, to be sacred convocations. 3 times the verses use the term them, O Tam, which can also be read as atem in plural, as you, atem in the plural. This comes to teach you are authorized to determine the date of the new month, even if you unwittingly establish the new moon on the wrong day. You, even if you do so intentionally, and you, even if you are misled by false witnesses. After hearing this, Rabbi Yehoshua said to him in these words, Akiva, you have consoled me, you have consoled me. What? Happy ending. Yes, but there's something more that I think was one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this back again with this other reading of it. The first time I taught this, I talked about the power struggle and about how it's important for us to, I talked about it in the mindset of how do we come to some sort of agreement in disagreement. How can we be in disagreement with one another? How can we learn to be in disagreement with one another? And what happens if we're in disagreement and a decision needs to be made? And in this case, the Talmud would be teaching us we need to go with those who are empowered to make the decision, even if we disagree with them. But the second story, I think, adds a nice little lens on top of that, which is that with that power also comes the responsibility and the understanding that those people may make mistakes. They may do things that they know are intentionally not necessarily best for some people, or maybe not necessarily intentionally wrong, but they certainly may make mistakes, and they may even be misled. And we need to give them the benefit of the doubt in those moments. It's something I'm thinking about a lot as I enter into the rabbinate, knowing that I have a long career ahead of me, God willing, that is full of mistakes and full of being told half stories and full of having to make decisions based on the mistakes I've already made and the half stories that I will be told. And it's something that I'm sitting with a lot in the world that we live in, where it's really hard to know, to tell truth from, to tell fact from fiction, given the fact that there are reputable journalists who will tell differing stories. I think one of the lessons that I really want to take away from this, and I apologize for not opening it up more, and although I do want to hear other people's thoughts before we wrap, one of the things I take away from this, at least, is that people make mistakes. And the Talmud is full of stories that tell us that people make mistakes, and when they make mistakes, whether or not they know after the fact that they've made mistakes and they still have to run with it, or they never find out that they made a mistake, we need to give them the benefit of the doubt in those moments, which can be really difficult because it could lead us to do something that we feel is deeply wrong. In Rabbi Yehoshua's case, he has to show up on a day that, by all accounts, according to the Talmud, is Yom Kippur. He's actually right in this, according to the facts. But nonetheless, he sits in a world in which he understands that decisions aren't made by God in this case, they're made by human beings, and human beings are fallible. And we have to sit in that world. I'm curious if other people have thoughts or reflections before we wrap. Yeah, so Marshall was sharing about Rabbi Klickfeld and how he, in the role of Mar D'Atra, is empowered to make decisions where multiple decisions can be the correct decision. He has to approach it from his perspective, from what he knows, and make the decision that's best for the community. Yeah, Deborah?
Thank you. Yeah, I just thought it was so amazing, your drash there. Thank you.
Thank you. So I want to end on, so that everyone can get out of here, Havdalah-ish time. I want to end on the note, on a blessing for all of us, that we may all be blessed, that the mistakes we make are as minimal as possible, and that people will be able to see through us as being more than just the mistakes that we make, but the human beings that are behind those mistakes.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.